Well, good morning, everyone. This is hearing number 30.7, submissions seeking rezoning at Ellesmere. Just before we hear from our first submitter this morning, anything for us from the Section 42A reporting team? Thank you very much. All right, our first submitter this morning is PB and JC Narkis. So I don't think you've appeared before us before, just to let you know that we've read all the pre-circulated materials, so you don't need to read that out loud to us. But you are very welcome to highlight key points for us, and then we'll see if we have questions for you. Sorry, are you Mr. Narkis?
Yes, sorry, obviously.
Narkis, are you able to sit down and speak into the microphone, because we're YouTubing the hearing?
Okay, is that better? So the report was done, and it was basically a site-specific and more accurate model that was reviewed by Environment Canterbury. They accepted it. It was given to Selwyn District Council. They've been accepting it in terms of setting the foundation levels on that Dunsandel estate. When this hearing came up, I then commissioned Mr. Throsell to extend that model to my particular site, and that's what's contained in that letter. So that's the evidence that's in the rebuttal evidence. Prior to having all this done, I'd also been in consultation with Environment Canterbury and got a flood hazard assessment done by them. And you can see a quote at the end of that PowerPoint. They basically didn't identify any problems with the site. It's a bit up and down, so there's some humps and hollows. The humps stay dry even in a 500-year flood. The hollows get some water in them. The letter talks about potential flooding somewhere between 0.1 and 0.3. That's in the Environment Canterbury one. I've got a copy of that I can leave with you, but I think the important quote is the one at the end from that. So regardless of which evidence you used, I don't think flooding is an issue on the site, which is obviously quite important given the events that have been happening up north. But Mr. Throsell's been asked to be available if you've got any questions via Zoom. We got any questions on that, or we keep going?
You carry on.
Okay, so the next one
you want to present to us, and we'll see.
Right, okay, so the next one's just basically response to the reporting officer's memo, just clarifying just that we're on the same page in terms of what paragraph 128 is actually requiring of me. The first one's the footpath. So I'm basically happy to agree to that. I see some benefits, and it came up trying to create a link through to, there's a bit of reserve land, a tongue of reserve land that goes at the back of Ellesmere transport that's underutilised. It'd be good to somehow link up with that, as part of the footpath network. Okay, the next one, please. Yeah, that's to do with the treatment with the rural interface. So creating shelter belt, planting and buffers. So once again, I'm happy to accommodate that. And then the next, one back, please. And then the third thing was trying to mitigate for any reverse sensitivity issues with Ellesmere transport site. So once again, I'm happy to provide a buffer and noise bund, potentially with a fence on top of it, which is covered in some of the acoustic reporting evidence. So in terms of those, paragraph 128, that's what I picked out from it, and that's what my response to that is. Hopefully I haven't missed anything in that 128. Okay, right, just to orientate you, because of my evidence, I talked about the Sherwood Estates and Sheep subdivision. I can, right. I'll hold it down. Maybe I'll just, okay, so this is the Sherwood Estates subdivision. This is the Ellesmere Estate subdivision up there with the land council. So those couple of areas are obviously going on. The question was this down there. Okay, next one, please. So, I mean, we've had the memo which has made the recommendation, and I hope the committee accepts that recommendation. What I've sort of put in most of my submissions is basically that we've had a dysfunctional land market in Dunsandel for quite some time since we sold out the Sheet subdivision. So for more, almost 20 years, we've had no supply of land available to be purchased in Dunsandel. As a result, we had no building going on in Dunsandel. If you look at the figures, I think we had 3 building consents over the previous 9 years. And unfortunately, that information was then extrapolated to as an assessment of actual underlying demand. I've argued for quite some time that it's more a reflection of supply, not a reflection of demand. The best I could do was come up with looking at what's happened in other comparable townships and say, well, you can see the growth here and the demand here. It would have happened in Dunsandel if there'd been land available, but there has been no land available. And based on that, the actual demand has been understated. It goes back to way back to the original, the current district plan. We did have something called the 1K rule, which actually had the land in question zoned as rural residential. That was removed, which was particularly damaging for Dunsandel because there was no alternatively zoned rural residential land, unlike some of the other townships. So from that time onwards, really, there's been no land available. Till the Dunsandel Estates was developed, and that actually gave us some actual market evidence because we then had a functioning market. All the sections sold, and currently there's about 14 getting built on at the moment. So I hope you accept the recommendation, because otherwise I would expect that the supply of sections in Dunsandel is going to run out. within the next 2 or 3 years, and then we'll be back to a dysfunctional land market with no supply. And that's probably, I'll leave it at that.
Right, I'll see if we have any questions for you.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can. Thanks. Yeah, no. So there was no engagement. We engaged with the iwi over the Dunsandel estate one, which is just over the road, and there wasn't any concerns or red flags or issues or anything raised in terms of. I'm not aware of any. I know Denise Sheath. I certainly don't think she's brought any cultural issues on the site to my
Are
attention.
you engaged with iwi on the Dunsandel estate?
Dunsandel
but
estates,
not with this one?
not with this one, no.
Okay, and then the other question I have what's happening with the cycle and pedestrian way, you know, the connectivity? There was a bit of an issue, wasn't there? Or it wasn't well explained how the cycleways and pedestrian ways would connect?
Well, that's sort of open to debate in terms of the detailed planning. Can we go back to the plan of Dunsandel? That the third slide in. The reality is that the community tends to walk around the block around Dunsandel. It's amazing how many people you see walking there, and they just put up the fact that there's no footpath and no cycleway. Seems to be quite a popular sort of track around the block.
Yeah.
The block being
Right.
so we had discussions with the council about private team change, so that there would be a link going through there connecting up with this strip of landscape reserve the council takes outside railway. That would be good to achieve that. And then obviously down the track with the cul-de-sac, so the cul-de-sac present will create some linkages as we can.
Okay.
So I don't know whether that answers your question, but
Well, it doesn't, but we'll
we'll
hear more.
Okay.
Hopefully it'll become clearer.
right.
Thank you.
What size sections are we looking at here? Brent?
Well, the zoning allows an average of 5,000, has to be an average of 5 to half a hectare, and then a minimum of 3,000. I don't think there's any maximum size.
Right.
So, yeah, depending on how you. So anyway, a minimum of half a hectare.
Thanks, Brent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your statements. I think I've got about 5 here. It's just a sort of, yeah, it's a question. It's across a number of your statements. You talk about a dysfunctional market in Dunsandel, and I know you were the developer for Dunsandel Estate, and that's currently got some, you know, it's being developed. We have heard evidence over the course of the hearings on the Selwyn District Plan that for a market to function properly, it needs a number of players, number of developers. And so in this instance, though, although you've argued it's dysfunctional now because it's, you know, demand has been determined by extrapolating development in there. It could also be argued that it will still continue to be dysfunctional if there's only one developer releasing sections to the market anyway. Do you have a comment on that?
I suppose my only comment is, I mean, supply from one developer is better than no supply in terms of functionality. Obviously, there's still a number of sections. Well, there's all the sections are in different ownership in the Dunsandel estate, so it's in the hands of those owners as to what they do, whether they land bank it or hold on to it or whatever. There's been a certain amount of resale go on where people have sold them at a profit. Yeah, I suppose that's it. And I guess it comes down to what the supply and demand is in terms of, I guess what you're getting at is they also talk about a competitive margin in terms of the Dunsandel, such as, little market. I don't know whether you're going to have that. I mean, in a Rolleston, I certainly would agree with those comments. Or a Prebbleton or a Dunsandel. I mean, the reality of it is it's not a huge place.
Sure. And is there much demand in your experience for, I guess, high density housing then?
No, not really. The only, if you can call it high density development, there was a little development done at the back of the Trinity Church, which was by Dunsandel standards, high development, townhouse sort of development. And my recollection was they were very slow to sell. You would think heading forward that there might be demand for, from retired people. I don't know. That's basically what that effectively became the retirement village of Dunsandel, that particular little development. But generally, no, people are attracted. It seems to be more attractive to people who want to raise a family. It's very family friendly. Dunsandel, it's got the school, play centre, sports groups. It's a good place to bring up a family. I know I've done that myself. I've lived there for 35 years and brought up a family there. And people who want that sort of small country town ambience that, they don't want to live in Rolleston or they can't afford to live in Rolleston. It's a good alternative.
Okay.
And one of the slides actually showed, when I was doing the analysis, one of the interesting things is there's an awful lot of employment based around the Dunsandel locality. So in terms of people wanting to live near where they work, it's a good option.
Sure. Thank you. No further questions.
Thanks, Nakis. I just got some questions either for you or for your planning advisor. I don't mind who answers them, but they relate to the National Policy Statement on Highly Productive Land. The property that we're considering this morning is Class 2 and 3 LUC. So we need to be satisfied that the proposal complies with clause 3.6 of that NPS. So my first question relates to clause 3.61b of that NPS. It talks about there are no other reasonably practicable and feasible options. So I was just wondering, as a property developer, had you considered the block of land that you referred to when you pointed to the PowerPoint called the block, which is that large, just a minute, wait for the question, which is that large area of vacant rural land that borders on Leaston Dunsandel Road, and that's within the township boundary. Had you considered that as an option as a property developer?
I did as a property developer. I mean, it's been on the market for a long time. And even recently, I think it was being advertised as a mortgagee sale. Frankly, I'm not a big time property developer. There's constraints in terms of it's just not feasible for me. I mean, there's a big difference between putting 35 lots into the Dunsandel market and putting 250 lots into the Dunsandel market. As I say, so from feasibility for me, I looked at it but discounted it as an option.
And I think you discounted it because it's too large. It would be too many blocks or too many lots for you to handle.
Both too many lots, and problems with the servicing. Whereas my one's doable, certainly for me, and doable from an infrastructure point of view.
And Mr. Chair, if I could add from a planning point of view, that block is just not available at the moment for planning purposes. I mean, this is a plan. My first point I was going to make is the point I made in my rebuttal that this is a plan review. The only options on the table for feasible is either the submitter's land or what might have been zoned through the proposed plan. And the block that you're talking about, of course, has significant servicing constraints, and there's no suggestion that that will be addressed anytime soon. So I wouldn't consider that to be feasible, even possibly over the life of a plan over 10 years.
Next question relates to MPS clause 3.61C, and we have to be confident that the environmental, social, cultural and economic benefits of the rezoning outweigh the long-term environmental, social, cultural and economic costs associated with the loss of the highly productive land. Where's the evidence from your perspective in front of us that deals with that issue? I couldn't find any evidence that dealt with that issue.
Well, I think the evidence or the argument is that we're actually providing, which is, I suppose, there's that tension between that and the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. We're providing affordable housing and providing a variety of housing. And obviously there's going to be benefits to that. I mean, having more population in Dunsandel has benefits in terms of it provides people to actually use the facilities that are there. It means that you've got people who can support the sports clubs, you've got people who can support the school, you've got people who can support the local volunteer fire brigade. From a community point of view, being able to allow that growth is good from a community point of view, and it's certainly good if you're a first home buyer who's looking for a decent sized section, who wants to bring up a family in a good community.
Anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, not really. I think that sums it up. I mean, in terms of the loss in production, we've got a area of land that's in 3 little lots. It's hardly a viable economic unit. It's unfortunately, we did expect our soil guy to be here, but he'd be better to speak to it. But I mean, having lived and farmed on the thing for 30 plus years, I mean, it's not the flashiest. I don't really think it's a highly productive unit. There's issues with the ability to irrigate. There's issues with the soil in terms of the water holding capacity. And there's also potential reverse sensitivity issues with the development, the residential development across the road.
What's the current land use of the block?
We basically we've got some horses. My wife and daughter love horses, so we've got a bunch of horses there which look pretty on the paddocks, and we lease part of it, the part that can be irrigated, to the dairy farmer next door, who runs some odd stock on and off it.
And the last part of the MPS that we need to satisfy ourselves on is clause 3.65. And that's that territorial authorities, or us wearing our delegated authority hats, need to take measures to ensure that the spatial extent of any urban zone covering highly productive land is the minimum necessary to provide the development capacity. Now, I think you're proposing 35 large lot residential sections.
Yeah, approximately. Yeah.
Yeah. Had you thought about instead developing the site using the low density residential zoning, which there is existing in the area, and that would certainly use a substantially smaller portion of the highly productive land to provide the 35 lots?
Well, I guess it goes back to whether you think there's a role to actually have large lot residential. I presume that there is a large lot residential zone to me because of the shape of the site. And the position of the site, that large lot works better because we have got the ability to give people to, as I say, site so that there's definitely no flood issues. You've got the ability for people to site so that they're away from the railway line on the state highway. And I think there's demand for large lot residential, which hasn't been available for 20 years. And I see in other townships, there's large areas of large lot residential being made available. So I assume that's because there's a demand in the market there. They seem to sell all right. Once again, if you go, from a development point of view, if you go to that large lot, well then, I don't know, what are we talking then when we're talking large numbers of lots versus I can handle 35 from a development point of view. So I just think it's better suited, the site's better suited and the market's better suited to put. And as I say, the National Policy Statement on Urban Development does talk about a range of product. Now this is creating that range of product.
Yeah.
Just following on from that, my understanding is that large lot residential would allow you to have individual sewerage for those lots, whereas if you went any smaller, you'd really need to go onto some form of sewer.
Well, septic tanks for the large lot, but I mean, septic tanks are allowed on the Dunsandel estates. I think there's a minimum size of 850 square meters or something to be able to have a septic tank.
Okay, and any history of that previous estate, those tanks are performing okay? They're not getting
well,
inundated in the winter? Or?
No, that's one thing about the soil conditions, the free. I'm not aware of any problems in the Sherwood estates, and I mean, they put in the old-fashioned septic tanks. Right. They've been going for, as far as I know, Environment Canterbury haven't created any problems in terms of that. And with the new sort of septic tanks that are available now,
it'd be fair to say if we wanted to go into a smaller lot, more intensive development there, we'd probably need to have sewerage onto Dunsandel.
Well, that would be down to Environment Canterbury.
Right. Thanks, mate.
Right, Mr. Narkis, no further questions from me. Thank you.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. I'm Richard Johnson from Aston Consultants that's been helping Mr. Narkis with this submission. And to help the Commissioner, a question about the connectivity and the roadwork. If you go to my evidence in chief, the original one at paragraph 24, where the ODP is, you'll see on the right-hand side of the ODP a notation with an R with a circle in it, with an arrow running between Tramway Road and down towards the railway line. So that indicated a potential future link from Tramway Road down to the council land there. And that was the discussion that Mr. Narkis was having with the council when he was considering a plan change. And that sort of detail was conventionally resolved at the subdivision stage. Because that goes to the lot layout. There are issues around the noise buffer. I mean, this would include this could function as the noise buffer as well. So the ODP does show that connectivity from Tramway down onto the land adjacent to the railway line. So all I'm saying is provision's been made. It's just a question of detail at subdivision stage. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I was just going to make 2 points. One is in several places in my evidence, there is some of the peer reviewers, or Mr. Nicholson in particular, kept going back to better options for urban development at Dunsandel. And the point I was making in my rebuttal was that the better options that Mr. Nicholson was relying on are just not available to the commissioners. And I think you'll accept that. I mean, this is a proposed plan. So the plan is a proposal. The proposal showed no additional zoning in Dunsandel, and the only other live proposition is Mr. Narkis' submission. I do accept that across the road there was a submission. There was 107 that hasn't really been advocated for. was, well, how do you assess what would be needed? And as Mr. Nakis' evidence has shown, of course, is that the growth model it's got a fundamental flaw because it's projecting forward from a very low base, right? And I think Mr. Nakis' evidence, which is actually supported by Mr. Foy, and it's a point I want to reinforce, is that Mr. Foy has actually come out in his response to the rebuttal supporting must have upset somebody. Yeah, the university. So I lost my train of thought now. Yeah, so Mr. Foy, I think it's important that you have two real estate experts or two experts, people with expertise in the housing market, basically coming to the same conclusion. I mean, Mr. Foy in his initial peer review said it would be appropriate to have 35 lots, and then I think he's gone stronger in his second review of the rebuttal evidence. So, but I think irrespective, all I was trying to do in my clumsy attempt to sort of rationalise between the HBL, the NPS and the UD was saying, well, okay, if you establish that there is demand, there is a need, there's an unmet need, then what's the appropriate approach that you would take? And I was suggesting I use tier 3, which actually removes the requirement for an HBA, for a housing and business analysis. Okay, that was the only point I was trying to make, is that it doesn't require that level of analysis, right? And so I think there's quite a bit of evidence in front of the commissioners around demand and around capacity, which you can look at in addition to what the cell and growth model does as well. Okay, and it's been explained why they are quite different. But they were the only 2 points that I was wanting to make, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And in response to that, you might have noticed I didn't ask a question about 3.61A, which is the sort of supply and demand part of that NPS. It was the other aspects of it I was interested in trying to get a better understanding of. So you're right if we ask questions now. Do you want to make any other points? No. Raymond? Nothing?
No, nothing for me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just got one question. Thank you for your statements of evidence. This is in relation to, just check, that's your evidence in chief. Let me just check. Yeah, 31st of July evidence in chief. And it is just paragraph 85. And it's just really exploring the comments that you make around MPSUD and whether it applies or doesn't apply to the site. And I guess you just touched on that before. And also policy 8 and whether that applies or doesn't apply. And I think in paragraph 85, you state that the MPS's relevance needs to be considered, including its direction of flexibility in providing at least sufficient development capacity. And then I think later on in paragraph 145, you think the policy 8 criteria don't apply. And I'm just interested in how you determine that the MPS does apply, but the policy 8 criteria don't. Where's your guidance that to sort of support that statement? Yeah, so paragraph 85, this is in your evidence in chief. It's just the relationship between, it's that exploring that document and how it applies to the site, MPS UD. So 85 paragraph, you say the MPS UD is relevant and needs to be considered. So basically you argue it's relevant. And then in paragraph 145, you say that you don't think the policy 8 criteria apply. And I'm just want to know, why do you think policy 8 criteria don't apply if you earlier argue the MPSUD is relevant?
So that's probably more of the confusion that I was just trying to explain before, where at the time I was probably holding the view that it wasn't part of an urban environment, right? Though I didn't explicitly say. I probably could have expressed that a lot more clearly. So because it's not part of the Greater Christchurch area, and of course this evidence was done a wee while ago, when the thinking at the time, we were just trying to grapple with how the relationship works. So and I think all I was simply saying is that my understanding is that the policy 8 criteria were more related to an urban area being of course, the definition in the NPS is an area of over 10,000 people with operating in the housing and labour market. And I think it was just nothing more than that, actually. So
Okay.
if I'm inconsistent in my evidence, and sorry, I was inconsistent, but
Right. So there wasn't specifically something in there which led you to make that statement. It was just your general interpretation of how the document applies.
yeah, I was struggling to work out how you would approach Dunsandel outside Greater Christchurch against the NPSUD.
Right.
And there are a number of other rezoning requests around, whether they're Darfield or whatever. And there's been quite a bit of discussion around the application of the NPSUD in those non-Greater Christchurch areas. And what policies, what parts of the NPS are relevant, which ones do you apply?
Okay.
And so that was the thinking at the time. So I probably have been a little bit inconsistent. Yeah.
So if you're saying now that you think Dunsandel's not urban in terms of the purposes of the NPSUD, then are you saying that the NPSUD no longer applies?
Well, the NPSUD applies to all tier 1 authorities. That's the tricky bit. All right. And I think there's a number of even the peer reviewers in this exercise have just raised that there's an interesting tension here between the language, because NPS HPL talks about urban areas.
Yep.
Right. They don't talk about urban environments, and it's urban environments that are defined in the NPSUD. And are those terms the same? And it just raises a question. That's all. You could be reasonably generous and say, well, for the purposes of this exercise, just consider them the same in area and environment. But sorry, I've been around too long. When a term's defined, it's defined for a purpose, right? And the difference in the use between urban environment and urban area is the bit that just creates a bit of uncertainty. And I think a number of commentators have picked up around the uncertainty, because it then goes to the relationship of NPSUD and NPS HPL.
Sure.
That's what it is. That's the conundrum.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate the two are slightly different definitions. And yeah, thank you. No further questions.
I was just hoping one of you could give me some clarification. I'm interested in getting clear in my mind what the recommended buffer widths are, but in terms of acoustic mitigation, and the two buffer widths. One would need to be for the state highway and the main south and then the railway, and then another one adjoining the general industrial zoning to the east. I just can't get clear in my mind where the acoustic experts have landed on the widths of the necessary buffers, and do the buffers contain an earthen mound and a fence on top of the mound, or is it just a mound, or is it just a fence? Where are we at?
Well, where I think we're at is, when I talked to my acoustic man, he was suggesting a 3 metre high mound with a 2 metre acoustic fence on top of that. That's just for the Ellesmere transport, because of reverse sensitivity potential there. In terms of the state highway and that's there's no buffer necessarily going there. There's already a buffer imposed by the proposed district plan in terms of the noise overlay, and the way we're designing the sections, you'd be falling outside that, but that's at this stage. But even if you were inside that, you're allowed to build. You just have to, I think, design around that.
Sorry. And Mr. Chairman, your question is a question that I had in my mind, because I had to go back because I see the word buffer and I thought, hang on, has someone put a number to that? My reading is, I don't think the peer reviewer has given a number. And again, I just refer to the fact of the ODP where that reserve land is shown, right, on that right-hand side. And so that reserve land is capable of concluding the bund, the noise bund, and presumably some distance. But I suspect, with the greatest respect, that's possibly a question for the proposer of the buffer. I mean, given that Mr. Smith from Altismo actually didn't agree with the buffer, I think the peer reviewer was the one that raised the issue.
Just remind me which of the many briefs of evidence has the ODP attached to it?
It's in my evidence in chief, Mr. Chairman, at paragraph 24, page 7. And yes.
All right, so Mr. Narkis, you say a 3-metre bound and a 2-metre fence bordering the industrial land, and in terms of the state highway, relying on the noise control overlay and the district plan, proposed district plan. Okay. And the width of the buffer adjoining the industrial zone? I mean, if you're going to build a mound with a fence on it, it's got to be.
Well, that sort of ties in terms of the reserve. And that was a negotiation that was started with Selwyn District Council as to.
All right, see if the panel have any further questions, Raymond? Malcolm, Andrew? No, thanks very much. Now, we don't, so thank you very much for your presentations this morning. Just for your information, as part of these rezoning hearings, we're not getting what's called a staff reply report because the staff are under time pressure to deal with all of the rezoning requests and the variation 1 medium density hearings that are coming up. So what we do at the end of, normally the end of the day, but we'll do it now since you're here. We see if we have any questions for the 42A officers. So Raymond, any questions for Mr. Rhodes? Mr. Rhodes, what's your understanding of that last issue we were addressing, acoustic buffers and mounds and fences and things?
Yeah, thank you. So I agree with the State Highway and the Railway. It was relying on the provisions of the proposed district plan and the buffers there. The buffer related to the eastern boundary with Ellesmere Transport, and no distance was included, but it was to be shown on the ODP. It was a recommendation, and those more technical discussions can happen at subdivision stage along with the design of the buffer. I do recall, I think somewhere in the initial submission evidence on noise, there was a design around 2-metre bund and a fence on top, metre fence. They're 3 metres and all with a bund.
And in terms of the NPS UD talking about, and also the NPS highly productive land talking about well-functioning urban environments, where are you at in terms of this proposal contributing to a well-functioning urban environment for Dunsandel?
Yeah, so following the rebuttal evidence and the review from Mr. Nicholson, there are some issues, but I look at development of a township. It's not uniform. It happens over time. And if you look at the EAP, Ellesmere area plan, it does show sort of the areas of Dunsandel and Grove maybe to be that well-functioning urban form. If that happens, then as Mr. Nicholson pointed out, this would be an appropriate area, but that's just not how urban development occurs. It does happen in ununiform ways. So ultimately, should those strategic direction plans be fulfilled, then this would be an appropriate urban form.
Sorry, and in terms of this proposal?
Yes, yeah, it's appropriate in the sense of, yes, I say yes, it is, as time and in time as Dunsandel develops, it will be located in the appropriate location. Those things just haven't occurred yet. So in the big view, yes, it is forming part of a well-functioning environment.
All right, thank you very much. So that's the end of our first submitter and first and only submitter on the Ellesmere hearing 30.7. So thank you very much for coming in. So just so Mr. Mathamo is not available, is he? Your soil expert. He was scheduled to appear. Okay. All right, thank you. Right, so now we're adjourned until 10:30. Well, good morning again, everyone. We're now resuming hearing 30.6, which is rezoning requests for West Melton. And our submitter this morning is West Melton Holdings Limited. And before we hear from them, anything for us from the reporting officer this morning?
It's just two things to note for the panel. There was several materials circulated this morning to the panel. So that was supplementary legals, an amended outline development plan, and supplementary urban design evidence from the submitter. So I'll leave that with Mr. Cleary to present the details on. There was also a joint witness statement that was received pretty late in the piece as well. So that's still always yet to be circulated to you, from what I understand.
Yeah, what's that one?
So that's the joint witness statement from Mr. Collins for the council. What did I say? Traffic.
Traffic.
Yeah, traffic, sorry.
So that's one we don't have yet, did you say?
Correct.
And what does it conclude?
I think there's general agreement. There's still two outstanding issues. So the first is in respect to whether one of the roads should be vested in council.
Yeah.
And the second relates to greater connectivity adjacent to the site to the west. Should be provided.
Okay.
So that was the first point. The second point is that Mr. Nicholson, council's urban design peer reviewer, is online if you've got any questions for him.
Okay. So Justine, I imagine that JWS will be hitting our email inboxes shortly.
Yes, but it came through from the traffic expert, so it hasn't come via Mr. Cleary, or you haven't seen it either. I'd only arrived about 9:45, I think.
Okay.
So yes, we'll circulate that.
All right, thanks for that, Mr. Cleary. Over to you.
Sorry, I just wanted to confirm that we do have all the information in the joint witness statements that, to my count, there are 4. So there should be traffic planning, urban design, and economics.
Yeah, so I've got 4 statements. The file reference, well, it says 2nd of March. So yeah, economics, planning, traffic, and urban design.
Okay. Right, so we're not missing any information.
No, so what's the additional traffic one? Is it over and above the 28th of February JWS, is it?
My understanding that there wasn't a transport joint witness statement circulated for this submission.
And it wasn't able to be completed, obviously, until such a late time because of availability issues.
I've got a JWS traffic for Hughes Development DPR 0411.
Yes.
So that's a different Hughes
Different one.
development, isn't it? Oh, that's not you at all. Okay.
Mm.
So let me get the right file. All right, now you carry on.
Yes, and the second thing, I'd just like to introduce you to everybody who's here on the team. Of course, you'll know Mr. Thompson and Ms. Lowenstein, but here we have Mr. DaCosta, who is the director of West Melton Holdings and Marama Tuai, and Mr. DaCosta is quite happy. One of the issues that is at play is to can we confirm whether or not the development will be specifically for a retirement village, and that confirmation comes out in the evidence and in amendments to the ODP. But Mr. DaCosta is very happy to address you on that if you like. And indeed, Mr. DaCosta is very happy to answer any questions that you may have. regarding the proposed development. And the steps that have been taken to date to actually progress a retirement village development on the site. And I've also got here Mr. Davies, who has actually given company evidence. And finally, Mr. Wilson, who is involved as well. So I have some very, very brief supplementary submissions, because I realize that you've been drowned in paperwork so far. But the purpose of these submissions is essentially to set out what I perceive to be the remaining issues in contention. And I do note at sort of 1.2 that the issue of the recent updates to the cell and growth model were canvassed at Friday's hearing for Hughes Development, albeit I understood you to signal that no weight should be given to this matter. If I'm incorrect on this, sort of Mr. Colgrave can address you further today. And so then from a reading of the various joint witness statements and Mr. Friedel's memorandum of last week, 1st of March, I've summarized the issues as follows: whether it's the development is going to be a retirement village or general residential, the issue of the vesting of the roads, and finally sort of urban design matters, which I've sort of referred to as connectivity and character issues. And so in terms of the first issue, Mr. Thompson, I've spelt his name wrong, he'll be unhappy with me, will take you through the amendments to the ODP, which are intended to ensure that the site is developed exclusively for retirement village purposes, as that term is defined in the proposed plan. And this outcome will be secured by an appropriate legal mechanism to be registered against the title of any allotments created as part of the development. With regards to vesting, so Mr. Ackerman will provide some evidence, and I think it's actually looking at the joint witness statement, it is agreed that the council typically does not require vesting of roads within a retirement village. And the reasons for that, of course, is the value that residents place on matters such as safety and security. And sort of those safety and security is sort of they're enhanced by the road design and sort of limitations on sort of vehicular access for public, that is commonplace in all retirement villages that I'm sure I am aware of, that I've worked on, and indeed I'm sure that you would be familiar with. And so we'd say that there are no special circumstances in the present case which justify the vesting of roads in respect of the proposed retirement village development. And so having said that, of course, the intention is, so you've got the east-west extension of Shepherd Avenue, and that will be vested in road. And that's sort of a kind of future-proofing should there be further development to the west of this site at some stage in the future. And now that's who knows when that could be, but as I said, there is future-proofing. And so if without that east-west connection in that location, extension of Shepherd Avenue, in reality, there would be no connection to any development to the west at all. So I'd submit that that is in actual fact a sort of a connectivity benefit of the proposal. And just in terms of the urban growth matters, because they are addressed in detail in sort of Mr. Lowenstein's evidence, including the supplementary evidence. But what I say is that entirely to be expected that Mr. Nicholson has focused on policy provisions relevant to his area of expertise. And sort of he refers to a particular sub-policy, and that's UGP 12 subsection 4. And what you have in front of you is the version dated 1st of July 2022 from the officer's right of reply in the urban growth hearing. And if you just, I'll just give you a moment to go through that. You're probably very familiar with it. And I'm just making the point that the sub policy, it needs to be considered, it's an obvious point, but it needs to be considered in its entirety. And so the assessment of what is proposed by means of the submission must have regard to, I've referred to it as internal and external connectivity. That is the within and between, so within the site itself and between the site and the surrounding area. And so on the first point, Ms. Lowenstein will essentially confirm that within the proposed retirement village, there's an extremely high level of connectivity for future residents. And overall, Ms. Lowenstein has a different opinion to Mr. Nicholson as to between connectivity, and she will respond to the relevant matters of disagreement in the 1st of March 2023 statement that was appended to Mr. Friedel's sort of memorandum. And finally, I just simply mentioned sort of it's the overall question for the panel. And so in deciding the appropriate zoning of the site, regard, of course, and again stating the obvious, regard must be had to all relevant objectives and policies, and not just a single sub-policy on urban design. Factored into that overall analysis are considerations as such whether or not perceived shortcomings in connectivity are sufficient to outweigh the undisputed benefits of providing a much in-demand housing typology. And I think, I don't think there can be any argument whatsoever that there is a demand for a retirement village type of offering in sort of Selwyn. I don't think that there can be any sort of realistic argument that finding a site to accommodate this type of development is pretty difficult, to say the least. And some of the members of the panel may have heard evidence recently in Lincoln about that matter from our VEDA representatives. Yeah. As I said, I don't think it is disputed. And sort of Mr. Colgrave, for example, talks about, well, I mean, is there any realistic possibility of a retirement village of this scale and nature being provided within the current urban zoning at West Melton? And not unexpectedly, he says that, look, that's unrealistic. But just in terms of that overall analysis, Mr. Friedel, that's what he undertook in his section 42A report. And sort of my impression was that his substantive concerns focused on consistency with the NPS HBL component of the urban growth objective 1. And then the second was supporting the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in urban growth objective number 2. The evidence presented by the submitter or filed by the submitter, and that's Colgrave, Matamo, Harnswood, and Ford, comprehensively addressed the first matter, which indeed I understand is no longer disputed, and that's from Mr. Friedel's memorandum. And then confirmation that the development will be exclusively for a retirement village and will include a range of sustainability initiatives, addresses in my submission the second matter. Mr. Friedel concludes that some of the planning issues may be able to be resolved through ongoing conference and the provision of additional information, and Mr. Thompson remains open to explore these issues further with Mr. Friedel. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll see if we have questions arising either from your recent document that you just read out to us or from your earlier legal submissions. Remy? Welcome. Andrew? I just got some questions from the original legal submissions.
Yes.
Let me just get those open. Yeah, I've got the right file open. So just at your 2.13, 213.
2.13 beginning with in addition.
Yeah. And you say there we can't rely on any such assumptions that those private plan changes would be approved, which is correct. But a lot of those private plan changes are also before us in terms of rezoning requests over exactly the same area of land.
Yes.
So what would your what would your response be if we were based on the evidence in front of us to consider that a lot of those or some or all of those private plan change areas should be rezoned as part of this PDP process. Would
Yeah,
that change your view?
Well, I mean, the first thing, of course, this is responding to the evidence of the Christchurch City Council. And so let me just pause and think about that question. I guess the starting point would be because at this point in time, there are simply submissions to the plan that it becomes very difficult to give them any weight. But conceptually, I understand what you're saying, that it may well be that your decision does approve some of those plan changes that are being advanced by way of submissions at the same time. I obviously accept that, but I just the point I was making was that Mr. Lightbody's assumptions were incorrect at the time he wrote that evidence. Yeah. I can't. I mean, so that fundamentally, of course, that's your task. You know,
right.
and it's entirely possible, or indeed, I would say entirely probable, that you would approve some of those parallel submissions. How many of them, I don't know.
And is that issue that you raise there, does that more relate to if the site in front of us today was to be zoned GRZ, general residential zoning? Does it apply more to that as opposed to a retirement village concept?
Much more, I would say, you know, because I do go on in the submissions to sort of identify what I'd refer to a subset of demand and capacity, and sort of all economic evidence that, you know, appeared sort of deals in general terms with residential supply and demand, as opposed to a particular component or a particular typology of development, which is, of course, the retirement village development. And again, on that, traversing through the various statements of evidence that have been before this panel, or sort of differently constituted panels, the evidence appears to be uncontested in respect of the need for, or the demand for, shall we say, the demand for retirement village development, and the absence of capacity to accommodate that type of development.
And that leads into my next question. It comes from your paragraph 228. You don't need to go there. It's not that specific. In terms of demand for retirement village developments within the wider Selwyn area, you referred to the one that's in front of us in Lincoln, next level developments, where they want to rezone the general industrial zone area within Lincoln and build a retirement village on that. If that was to gain favour with us as a hearings panel, how would that affect the demand for this retirement village that we're considering this morning?
Yeah, so it's simply part. So it's not a question of just one additional site will satisfy the demand. And you know, sort of we have the market research analysis that was undertaken as part of the development of this proposal. And again, you have the evidence of the Retirement Village Association for the residential hearing about matters such as demand, and there's no way that one village is going to meet that demand. And I would say that the fact that Arvida is actually in its efforts to find a suitable site has to go to the lengths of seeking a rezoning of general industrial to residential is a perfect illustration of actually how difficult it is to find sites.
Next question.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, Mr. Thompson will take you through the amendments. And I just sort of point out that, I mean, sort of, I understood, and I don't want to be speaking out of turn, but I understood that Mr. Friedel and sort of was interested in some sort of mechanism that would lock in retirement village development. And obviously, Mr. Friedel hasn't had time to consider the detailed wording in the amendments to the ODP.
Yeah, sorry. If we were to be persuaded by that evidence and the amended ODP as presented this morning was to go into the plan, would it be correct that if that then needed to be changed, that would require a further plan change process?
It would default to non-compliant activity. That's my understanding. Any subdivision of the land that, well, it just simply couldn't be used for general residential. And if a plan change were required, then really so be it. Like the position of the client, who is an experienced retirement village developer, who has identified a demand in Selwyn District, is that, as I've said, they're fully committed to development of a retirement village. One can't provide 100% certainty, of course, but then 100% certainty isn't required.
Yeah. And just a final question, and it might not be for you, just in terms of the current land use of the site, what is the current land use? A lot of it appears to be kind of open pasture type land.
That's my understanding. It'd be better to direct those questions to somebody like Mr. Harnsworth, who has been on the site and undertaking the soil testing, or even Mr. Mathamo.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all I had from the legal.
Thank you.
Now we can go
Now
through
we
your
can
witnesses.
move. I think we'll go. Yes, we've got Mr. Harnsworth waiting. There he is.
Mr. Hainsworth, can you hear us?
Oh, I can. Good
And
morning.
we can hear you. So good morning and welcome. Thank you for the evidence you've provided. We've read that. So you're very welcome to highlight any key points for us, or else we can just go to questions. Over to you.
Happy just to go to questions.
All right, Raymond. Malcolm. Andrew. So Mr. Hainsworth, the only question I have is one that I just put to council. What's the current land use of the site?
Sorry about that. I just had my YouTube thing on and it confused me for a second. Say that again?
Yeah, what's the current land use of, how would you describe the current land use of the site?
Yeah, basically pastoral at the moment.
Do you know what, is it stocked at all, or do you know if it's used as dairy runoff or?
When I went down to see it, it had been it was grazed fairly, like it was a reasonably extensively grazed site. It has in the past, like you can see the way it's been used compared to the way it's so yeah, it's basically just someone's grazing. I don't know whether it's dairy grazing or not. I didn't see animals the day I was there. I think there were some, it had been cut for hay, actually. There were hay bales, large hay bales there when I was there.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hainsworth. That appears to be all the questions we have for you.
Great.
So I understand from a local is Mr. Wilson here that the site has been destocked approximately 2 years ago. We have Mr. McNamara,
Thank you.
next cab off the rank.
So good morning, Mr. Mathama. You've appeared before us before. As always, you're welcome to highlight key points for us. We read the evidence, or else we can go to questions. That's up to you.
No key points to highlight. We can go straight into questions.
Okay, thank you, Raymond. I've just got a few questions for you. In terms of the issues you raise, in terms of the constraints on the property, do you know what the, and in terms of the land and water regional plan, what the baseline in-loss is for the site?
No baseline has been established. So basically, someone will need to go back to the 2009-2013 data and then just work from there. But given the existing land use, I would say it's close to the 15 or below the 15.
Okay, use of nitrogen.
And I guess then you wouldn't know, it wouldn't have a GMP loss rate worked out for it?
No, nothing has been established.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just carrying on in terms of that, do you know what the current in-loss for the land use would be as it is today?
No, that hasn't been done. Can be done, but hasn't been done.
And in terms of, I think you've appeared before us a number of times with reasonably similar briefs of evidence for a number of submitters. And in each of those, you do an assessment where you look at the percentage, or you take the area of land in question, turn that into a percentage of highly productive land within Selwyn and conclude it's insignificant.
That's correct.
And I'm just wondering, in terms of the sort of death by 1,000 cuts issue, when would you ever come before us and say that it was significant?
I couldn't tell you when I would say that, but I can certainly tell you that it's still quite low. At the moment, it's around 0.69% for the whole of the Selwyn region on a regional basis. So to me, that's still quite low. So even if we're to add some of the properties that I am not aware of, to still get to say 1%, you almost double whatever the land that I've looked at. And I'm not aware of that many significant developments that would bring it to 1%.
So in terms of that, are you saying that if there was 1% cumulative loss of highly productive land across Selwyn, in your mind, that would be significant?
Still not. It wouldn't be significant in my mind.
Sorry, would or wouldn't?
It wouldn't be, partly because 1% is still quite a small number, and partly because whatever reductions are experienced by that loss can easily be made up for elsewhere by intensifying elsewhere on land that's more suitable and has got less constraints than the land that we are dealing with. I'll give you an example. If say there was a loss in LUC class 2 or 3, LUC class 4 land with the right conditions can come quite closely to providing the same level of productivity that's been lost elsewhere.
Does the NPS highly productive land direct us toward that kind of analysis, or is it just about avoiding urban development of highly productive land unless the tests can be met set out in the NPS?
It focuses on avoiding. To be honest, the final draft that came through was a bit of a disappointment compared to to what we were working with before. In my mind, it basically doesn't want any development or care, and I can understand that. If applied to areas such as Pukekohe, but certainly doesn't apply to Canterbury, I would say, and say Southland and most of the South Island. I think the people that produced the final version had the likes of Auckland in mind and maybe Hamilton, that catchment. So it doesn't. To answer your question, it doesn't direct you, it basically avoids. And I also fail to see why the exclusions provided for in 310 don't apply to clause 3.6, because land that's been proposed for a plan change would still be subject to the same kind of constraints as land that's been proposed for subdivision under clause 3.8 or other uses under the other clauses. So the final version is a bit of a letdown, really. It's not helpful.
So are you saying to us as an independent expert, you have a fundamental philosophical problem with the NPS?
The way it's worded, yes. Yeah.
And would you say that's influenced your assessment?
Oh, no, not at all. My assessment is just facts as they are. Yeah, it's just what it is.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Chairman, can I have a follow-up question?
Yes.
Just follow-up question. So you think you said about, was it 0.69% or thereabouts of versatiles, high productive land loss? And what's the time period for that? Is that this current district plan review round of rezonings? Or
it's just the private plan changes and some of this district plan rezonings all combined together. I think last time I directed you to an appendix that I had that kind of run a tally of all the developments.
Yes, you did. Thank you. So that means there might still be another 0.69% next district plan review, and then another 0.69% the next district plan review. Do these all add up over the course of the next 100 years to where we start to lose a significant level of highly productive land in your mind?
As I answered before, I couldn't put a number and say, 10% is the maximum possible, or 1% or 2%. What I can tell you is land that's under production now could easily be used even more productively. So it can intensify existing land, even with this reduction, and still not suffer significant losses. As I said, this NPS, I think, had in mind the likes of Pukekohe, where you can actually see residential areas encroaching onto that farmland, and that's basically going. But down here, where you've got these wide open spaces and losing 20 hectares, say in West Melton, that can easily be made up for, down the road where the conditions are much better. There is more water available for irrigation to produce more, and the soils are better in many cases.
So could the same argument be made in Pukekohe in terms of, well, it's only this much percentage, therefore it's not significant, or is there a different land productivity environments up in that part of New Zealand?
Which argument is this?
The Pukekohe. So could you argue it in Pukekohe area, it's only 0.6% of the soils that are highly productive and therefore it's okay? Could you make that argument up there?
Oh, if 0.6 is a small number to me, yeah. So if in Pukekohe it was 0.6%, that's a small number. So you still have over 99.4% still, still available for productive use.
Yeah, so you can make that argument in a number of places in New Zealand. So again, I'm just looking at what is the MPSHBL telling us to do then? Is it saying that it's okay to have small changes individually, site by site, over a period of time for the next 100 years is actually fine?
It basically says avoid. So to me, avoid is, don't touch,
Yes.
go elsewhere and do it somewhere else. So I still come back to the point that 0.6 is a small number to me. So 99.4%, and that loss in 0.6 can easily be made up even within that 99.4%, pretty easily.
Through intensification.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, for sure.
All right, thank you. No questions.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I am.
Don't go yet, we've got some
Okay, yeah,
follow-up
I'm just
questions.
very interested in your comment about intensifying the use on other soils to bring them up to the same level. Are we able to do that without in-loss problems and without soil structure problems? I'm just concerned about some of the soils we've got. We've seen Tiparita redeveloped from a desert to fully producing pasture with the end is in the male. I can't say as to what it's going to do to our groundwater.
Yeah.
I'm just interested to see the intensification, because I am aware that some of those very Pukekohe growers have bought tracts of land in mid Canterbury, not far from Kirui, to produce here.
I'm chuckling because I'm familiar with the term. It's in the mail. I used to be on the Selwyn Waiora Zone committee, so
you know very well.
So we used to use that term quite a lot. So I was having a discussion with someone a while back, and I was saying the challenge that our policymakers have, or that we have as practitioners, is that these policies are being made in isolation, and they are now kind of conflicting. So you raise end loss. So when you intensify, end loss is going to increase, but then you're constrained by the statutory policies. So you still have to work within that framework. So when you do intensify anyway, even on this land that we are talking about as being potentially lost, there's going to be an increase in end loss. So it's going to happen regardless. The question is, are we still working within the required limits, if you like? So when I say intensifying, so let's check 20 loss, say, for our site, and then we try and increase production somewhere down the road where the conditions are more ideal. You'll probably find 20 on that other site that we want to intensify, there's probably 100 hectares, and they're probably just farming 60 hectares. So there could still be room to increase productivity there, and manage one's affairs to try and stay within the limit. But the limits do catch you anyway, regardless.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And one more question from me, Mr. Mathamo. Whereabouts in the NPS highly productive land does it say that we can disregard avoiding the loss of an area of highly productive land on the assumption that other highly productive land can be intensified? Where in the NPS does it?
Oh, it doesn't say.
Doesn't
that.
say that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't say that. But what we are saying is because it's trying to protect productive land. It's saying, we have to still be able to produce for future generations. And my argument is, if we reduce it here, we can make up for the difference over there. So for the percentages that we are talking about, there is really no reduction in potential food production for future generations.
All right, no further questions. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
Can I, if I'm permitted, can I just add just a comment arising out of your last question, Commissioner. And you said, where does it say in the NPS that you can't take into account the possibility that the loss in one area could not be offset elsewhere? And it obviously it doesn't specifically say that, but I would say that the assessment exercise under 3.6, in particular 3.63, where you talked about there's the over evaluation of benefits and costs, and including the tangible and intangible benefits. And I would suggest that, sort of that particular subclause is expressed broadly enough that one could take into account the possibility that any loss in one site could be offset by an increase in production elsewhere. It's a matter, in my view, of it is, sort of partially a matter of fact and partially a matter of legal interpretation, I would say. In the same way as I would say that 3.613, that overall benefits and costs, that the constraints that are identified specifically in 3.10 are directly relevant to that. Because if they are constraints, those constraints are relevant to the quantum of the loss.
Yep, next witness, thanks.
We should have Mr. Coldgrove on board.
Mr. Colgrave, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, I am.
Sorry, just couldn't see you on the screen. So good morning and welcome. You've appeared before us several times before, so I think you know the drill.
Yes.
We've read your evidence. You're welcome to highlight key points, or we can go to questions. That's up to you.
Yeah, look, the only point I guess I want to make is just the idea that this proposal should be treated as distinct and different from other sources of demand that might be competing for space in West Melton, the broader district. And when we do these pretty high level demand and capacity assessments, we're really looking at everything in totality. And I think it's important within those broader exercises to drill down and consider the need for living for specific demographics. And that's what this proposal is seeking to do. That's my only comments there.
All right, are you happy if we go to questions?
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Colgrave. I'm looking at your paragraph 1.141, where you, at the end of it, you say, accordingly, the need to ensure that there is sufficient employment opportunity nearby is less important than ever. Do you have any research to back that up?
Sorry, I'm just reading that specifics. So that's in the context of this specific development, which is targeting people 55 plus, and a significant proportion of those people won't be working. So I think the comment I'm trying to make there is that, in a general sense, working from home is, is gaining momentum. This is probably about the 15th hearing like this I've done remotely, so as an example. So that's a general workforce trend, but within that, we're talking about a segment of the population where a large proportion won't be working at all, or if they are working, they won't be working on a daily basis and having to commute somewhere. So it's very much couched in that context, madam.
Thank you. That was all.
Thanks.
Mr. Colgrave, the TEV analysis that you did in
Yes.
terms of the costs and benefits of losing the productive land as opposed to what's in front of us, just want to confirm that the TEV analysis in your evidence, does that relate to general residential zoning, or is it specific to a retirement village proposal?
The analysis that I did was linked to the retirement village, but I do say in that analysis that if we defaulted to just a general residential zoning outcome, the number of dwellings would probably go from 220 as proposed to around 180. And I think I make the point somewhere in there that would lead to about a 15 to 20% reduction in some of those economic benefits in terms of GDP from construction. So my baseline is at the retirement village, but I've got a little paragraph in there to say that it'd be 15 to 20% lower if it was just GRZ stuff.
Okay, thanks very much for clarifying that. No further questions.
Thank you.
Sorry, is Stu? Is Mr. Ford in the queue? Yeah. Shall we go to Mr. Ford next? Yes.
I mean, basically, you present the witnesses and
yes, I know, but it just seems
yes.
natural. It seems. I'm just going to suggest it seems natural to have him on next.
Yep, no, that's fine. So, Mr. Ford, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. We can hear you. So good morning and welcome. Thank you very much for your evidence, which you've read. You don't need to read it out loud to us, but you're very welcome to highlight key points, and then we'll see if we have questions for you.
Okay, I'm having trouble with my screen at present. It's going funny. I'm quite happy to take questions.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ford, it appears we have no questions for you. Your evidence is clear on its face, so there's nothing we need to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're going next. I've just realised that we probably should have had Mr. Davies to start off with, but we can get him to step up now. And if you have any questions, he hasn't prepared a summary, but if you have any questions of him, feel free.
Thank you very much for that. So Davies, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
So again, do you want to summarise any points for us, or are you happy to take questions?
No, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. I'll just bring up your evidence just a minute. Ray, any questions?
As soon as I turn it on. What are the advantages over and above other retirement villages for residing in a Harlow retirement village?
There's a couple. We're looking at developing a slightly different model to a traditional retirement village. This is primarily based on making it more accessible for people to live. Everybody's position is different by the time they reach the age that they want to move to a village, and we're just looking at giving more options and more accessibility. In terms of what it looks like, very similar offerings. I think the retirement village market knows what people want out of that type of village, and we aim to meet those. A little bit is about the community and the location of Harlow villages. Selwyn as a district definitely has a shortfall in retirement villages. I think there's evidence that points to that that's been provided or referred to. And I think a Harlow village in a place like West Melton gives the opportunity for people to still feel part of a community as well as contribute to a community. And I think that's a really good advantage of a Harlow place.
Great, thank you.
So
the options. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your statement. I'm just interested, you've identified different ownership models. which I found quite interesting. So thank you. That was interesting anyway, and insight into the retirement village and industry, I guess, and ownership models. Are they actually in action, or are these? I think they're all still proposed, aren't they? I guess what certainty have we got? I'm very interested to know what certainty do we have that your company does provide these through this, will provide these through this development?
Yes, so they're still in development, so we don't have a draft agreements for each model. For a village, we're still very early days in bringing this village into reality. But they're aimed at providing, once again, more accessible options depending on people's circumstances. So as we get to retirement, it's the agile thing, capital versus cash flow. And as people might have more of one than the other, and this just gives them more options and potentially more benefits when they leave a retirement village as well.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. You've made a comment in paragraph 5.8 that better outcomes be more readily achieved if proposals incorporated into a master plan greenfield environment, I think, rather than, I guess, creating in an existing urban area. Yeah. So the other retirement villages that you've got there, all greenfield as well, are they?
Yes,
that you're developing? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But there are a lot of retirement villages, I think, that are in existing environments. So what do you base your statement on, your observation?
Similar to the comments earlier in this hearing, Arvida at Lincoln, for example, it's about finding a site that's suitable, that meets all the planning outcomes that people want, is in terms of being well connected and everything, but also providing the things that people that live in a retirement village want, as far as, a place of their own, a sense of community within that village, and the sense of security.
Sure. So, and that's easier to deliver, I guess, in terms of if it's a greenfield and you can manage to control the layout and the access points, etc.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think, the layout that we've got, we're limited on the eastern side, sorry. But even though it is a retirement village, there's still potential for connectivity if the north and west of West Melton is expanded beyond our site.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
So, Commissioner Willis, Mr. DaCosta he's the one who's responsible for developing the different options in terms of ownership and lease, etc. And he can actually provide you with a little bit more detail on that.
I think my question's been answered anyway.
Okay.
Thank you.
Davey, just for your information, I've been a decision maker on several retirement village proposals in the North Island, and each one of those was a greenfield site for the reasons that you explained to us. It's quite hard to find a 10 hectare or so site within an existing urban environment. So I do understand your evidence in that regard. What I'm interested in is in your evidence, you say that you've got a Rangiora Waimakariri proposal currently underway. What has the uptake and demand been like for that proposal?
Yeah, actually, I better point out that one is not entirely greenfield. It's within an ODP area already identified, but it is very small and constrained. It's only 4 hectares. Interest is strong. We've got to the point where we had a consent for 71 units, I think, over a 2 hectare block of that land holding. Currently looking to reconsent that over the 4 hectares to 126 lots. So yeah, we want more units out of that.
Yeah, and in terms of have any of those been sort of pre-sold, or have you registers of interest? Just how's it working in terms of what the actual demand is likely to be there, do you know?
The marketing hasn't completely come out yet, although works anecdotally from our people on the ground. There would appear to be good interest when it comes to market.
All right, no further questions. Thank you. Oh, welcome.
Yes, I'm interested in the greenfield side of it. I reside in Trebleton, where I've got Somerset being built at the moment and a large booper, which are both under construction. I don't believe they've sold out yet. I'm interested to know from your experience, your residents. I'm worried about walkability and getting around from there where your proposal is down into the main part of the township. Do your residents tend to move much, or are they more sedentary and stay where they are?
The development at West Melton, it's primarily focused on independent housing, independent living, rather than offering the full range of care facilities. So we would expect the residents in Harlow West Melton to be more actively mobile.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Ackerman. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Excellent, we can hear you. So yeah, welcome. Thank you very much for your evidence. We've read that. You don't need to read that out loud to us, but you're very welcome to highlight any key points you'd wish to do so, or else we can just go to questions. Over to you.
So following conference, yes, I can. Oh, yep, all good.
Sorry, Mr. Ackerman, did you want to highlight any key points for us, or are you happy if we go to questions?
I think I just want to highlight. Sorry, I can hear myself on. Well, apologies. I'm just trying to. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud
Oh,
and clear.
okay.
We're not getting any feedback. If you're getting feedback, we're not getting it. So just proceed.
Yeah, I had some feedback, but it's gone now. I just wanted to highlight two areas of disagreement following expert conferencing with Mr. Matt Collins of Flow Consultants, which remain. We've since completed the joint witness statement, but obviously that was too late for submission. So there's just two areas of disagreement. The one relates to the indicative road cross sections proposed within the outline development plan. And I think the key point there is that with the retirement land use, the roading network would be privately owned for most part, and hence there is some flexibility for varying road cross sections compared to council standard cross-sectional requirements and or dimensions. The second point of disagreement relates to the vesting of the northern part of the north-south spine road. That's the section to the north of the east-west road corridor, where we maintain that with the retirement village proposal that the road will remain privately owned. However, it is acknowledged that with other land use, other residential land use, that the road would be vested. So those are our only two areas of disagreement at this stage. I'm open for any other questions?
Thank you very much. Mr. Ackerman, just remind me, and I should remember this, in terms of what's proposed in the internal roading layout, would there be footpaths
Yes,
on one side or both sides?
at least on one side of the road.
All right, thank you very much. It appears we have no further questions for you.
All good.
Works?
Yeah, that works fine. So good morning and welcome. We did read the pre-circulated material, but in terms of the stuff that came in this morning, obviously we haven't had a chance to read that. So are you happy just to read that out to us and we'll follow that on
Happy
the
to do so.
screens as you do that?
Is that the copy I gave you?
Yeah, that's a copy of it. All right. I've provided rebuttal evidence on the 10th of February this year, to which Mr. Nicholson replied with a summary of evidence on the 1st of March. Expert conferencing took place on the 2nd of March, it's been busy, culminating in a joint witness statement. At the time of the expert conferencing, I had not yet received the summary of evidence of Mr. Nicholson, but upon reading it, I considered that the topics discussed in the UD conferencing do cover the matters raised in the summary evidence. In reply to my rebuttal evidence, Mr. Nicholson issued a summary of his evidence, and that's the one on the 1st of March, in which he states that the conclusions relating to the substantive urban design and landscape matters remain unchanged by the additional evidence. Whilst he agrees the site has the potential to contribute to a compact and consolidated form for West Melton, it is his opinion that the poor connectivity and accessibility proposed in the ODP undermine the potential benefits. Mr. Nicholson bases his assessment on the single aspect that the ODP provides a single primary connection through a vacant section to Shepherd Avenue for pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles, including service vehicles, that this would not provide sufficient connectivity to create a well-functioning urban environment for a medium-density residential development or a retirement village. With regards to the urban design, the joint witness statement, no concern was identified related to the ODP itself with regard to internal layout, including internal connectivity, access to open space, and amenity. We both agreed that a landscape strategy is a positive attribute. In summary, we both agreed that the ODP has the potential to contribute to a compact and consolidated form for West Melton. Although this is a planning matter, concern was raised in the Section 42A report by Mr. Nicholson that the proposal should provide more certainty that the ODP ensures a retirement village remains the primary outcome and does not easily revert to the underlying general residential zone, which allows for a variety of development scenarios. This matter has now been addressed by amendments to the ODP. Mr. Thompson will discuss. Even with confirmation that the site will be developed exclusively for a retirement village, I understand there are still two key points of disagreement, namely residential density and character and connectivity accessibility. So moving on to residential density and character. Excuse me. There appears to be a change in position on Mr. Nicholson's behalf between the Section 42A report, where he recommended a density of 15 households per hectare, and the joint witness statements, where he appears to offer a different view. This is probably a moot point, given the amendments now proposed to the ODP narrative. There also appears to be a difference of opinion with Mr. Friedel, where Mr. Friedel, concludes that there are appropriate controls identified in the ODP to maintain the amenity and character of the township through open spaces and boundary edge treatments. Mr. Friedel considers that overall, the rezoning is generally consistent with the built form and amenity that characterizes West Melton, on the proviso that a minimum density of 15 households per hectare is prescribed. And I'll just refer to the relevant paragraph in the Section 42A report. In paragraph 12 of the joint witness statement, Mr. Nicholson considers that the proposed built outcomes and their impact on the character of West Melton have not been investigated for either a 15 households per hectare residential development or a retirement village. Mr. Nicholson notes that the existing residential density in the higher density parts of Preston Downs is 6.2 households, and in Wilford and Gainsborough subdivision it is 4.2 households. In his opinion, a residential development with 15 households per hectare or a retirement village with 20 households per hectare will create a significant change to the character of the existing village. Firstly, I disagree with Mr. Nicholson's statement that the built outcomes of a retirement village and their impact on West Melton were not investigated. The application provided a likely layout of the entire retirement village design in a three-dimensional form with streetscape and edge treatment visualizations. The urban design report also includes the rationale for the landscape strategy to assist the development to visually and physically integrate into the wider context and includes specific mitigation measures and edge treatment, including setbacks and landscape treatment. This is clearly evidence that the impact of the proposed built form of a retirement village on the surrounding environment and West Melton as a whole were investigated and subsequently addressed, and would like to add also that a visual assessment was undertaken as part of the application. Furthermore, Mr. Nicholson equates density with character. Density is one part when combined with several other aspects that contributes to character. Density primarily deals with intensity of built form, including height and scale of buildings, but not the typology. The typology remains residential. Density primarily impacts on the relationship of built to non-built space. The gap between buildings reduces as density increases. An equally, if not more important contributor to the character of an area or township are the public environs, such as streetscape, open space, and landscaping. With regard to character, a retirement village displays very similar characteristics to any other residential development in West Melton. Residential roading standards, formed footpaths, high levels of street lighting, regular lineup of driveways, fencing and screening for privacy, and a domestic scale to front and backyard landscaping create a typical suburban residential character. The proposed retirement village will display a similar, if not higher quality, residential streetscape. In addition, there will be a slightly reduced building scale for the individual villas. An overall higher density of built form will primarily be experienced to smaller breaks between buildings. This leaves Mr. Nicholson's concern raised in paragraph 13 of the joint witness statement that the community hub and serviced apartments in a retirement village are likely to be relatively large scale buildings with extensive car parks. As the application documents clearly show, this is not the case. The purpose of the proposed hub has been identified as community services auxiliary to the retirement village functions and does not include residential or hospital dementia care facilities. And this has been verified just earlier as well. To address these issues, Mr. Thompson has added further to the ODP narrative. In addition, the hub has been located in the center of the site to reduce any potential effects on existing neighbors and is located at the edge of the larger open space to provide a sense of scale and context. This is just to explain that within a retirement village, yes, there are some larger buildings in comparison compared to the smaller villas, but they are placed in central locations and there is a sense of scale provided through the larger open space. With regards to connectivity and accessibility, Mr. Nicholson originally considered that the site has poor connectivity but could have a moderate level of connectivity if a second street connection could be provided onto State Highway 73, a second future street connection provided to the land to the west, and a safe shared pedestrian cycle path could be provided from the site to Whedon's Ross Road along State Highway 73, and this is taken directly from the Section 42A report. These suggestions show to me that Mr. Nicholson is aware of the limited opportunities available to connect to the east and that he understands the role of the centrally located multimodal connection the proposal provides. I have responded to his suggested improvements in my rebuttal evidence and would like to summarize that. A direct connection to State Highway 73 is not possible, and for a retirement village is not really desirable to avoid through traffic. However, emergency access can be provided directly off State Highway 73 onto the cul-de-sac in the south. A second road connection to the west is now clearly identifiable on the ODP. Just want to reiterate that that was actually present right from the start. It was just not visually as clearly to be found on the ODP, so that has just been made graphically clearer. Good pedestrian and cycle links to the southeast corner of the site are available to enable future access to shared pedestrian and cycle facilities along State Highway 73. And that contribution can be made towards the implementation of such a link. The link itself is, however, dependent on the future road layout of this part of State Highway 73 within the context of the ongoing changes to the highway as it traverses West Melton. And I'm pretty sure you're aware of the intersection upgrades currently underway. From the plan's perspective, and that is the Urban Growth Policy 12, from the Section 42A officer's right of reply on the 1st of July, included the following specific reference to connectivity. And I think that has been, would you like me to read it out? I have also noted the specific assessment matters for the location of retirement villages, which is the reference below, whether the development is located within walkable distance of any of, that must be a typo in there, centre zone, community facility, or any arterial or collector road as set out in the appendix and so forth. So these are the two key assessment matters or guidelines to work with. Connectivity can be achieved in various ways. West Melton is still a reasonably small place and is primarily built on a nodal connection principle, with smaller gridded, mostly new residential areas attaching to it. The proposal for the site fits into that structure with a high level of interconnected local roads and pathways leading to a central node at the reserve hub that then connects to the outside. Although it may not provide a high level of permeability through the site, it does have two major advantages. It prioritizes walking and cycling over vehicular movement, and it provides the best access scenario for retirement villages with limited access points. I stated in my rebuttal evidence, direct connectivity from the site to the adjacent eastern neighbour is currently limited to a single connection. This was a criterion right from the start of the conception of the proposed retirement village and works to some extent in its favour. The fine grain of the internal layout creates an ideal environment for the higher density of the retirement village, a strong focus on high amenity pedestrian pathways, all converging in the main reserve. From there, the single connection to the existing residential neighbourhood to the east ensures a good level of connectivity to the outside, level of control and safety appropriate for the retirement living, and at the same time reduces potential interference with the existing low-density housing along the eastern edge. Additional connections to the east, if they were available, would increase access points and direct connections with Preston Downs residents and the retirement village, but it would not really alter the connectivity to the town centre destinations in a material way, as the available routes through Preston Downs are the same. The shortest and safest pedestrian cycle connection is still the shortcut via a pedestrian link to the school opposite Elizabeth Allen Drive. Internal connectivity must be taken into account, and there is no apparent priority in the policy between connectivity within or beyond a development site. As the proposed retirement village includes a range of carefully designed and readily accessible open spaces, together with the village hub facility, my view is that the development will have an extremely high level of internal connectivity. This is well beyond what is typically found in greenfield residential developments. Mr. Nicholson is concerned that the proposed site would have a low-level accessibility to public services and facilities as a result of a lack of connections and walkway and cycling facilities and limited public transport options. He bases this low level of accessibility on the single connection point and the relatively convoluted routes outside the development, and these are his words, with the result that the majority of houses in the proposed site would be more than 1 kilometre from the shops and the school. I have covered this in my rebuttal, and would like to summarize that a single connection point does not automatically mean low connectivity, and a travel distance of 1 to 1.5 kilometers acceptable for the type of journeys undertaken by residents of the site within the West Melton context, as it equates to a 15 to 20 minute walking. For occupants of retirement villages, walking journeys are not typically time sensitive, as it's noted at paragraph 23 of the planning joint witness statement. And what I would like to add here also is that for retirement villages, and this is what this paragraph elaborates, the paragraph 23, it's a different nature of movement and walking. It is not like walking to a school at a particular time, arriving or getting to work. The walking is often a mixture between recreational, it might even be to fitness. It is a social event going for walks. They are often circular with a destination in between there. So it is, I don't think we can compare retirement walking directly with, myself commuting to work every day walking. With regard to walking distance, the relevant factor is not the actual distance, but the travel time. Accepted urban design is that a journey should not take more than 15 to 20 minutes to reach a destination. The key aim is to create the 15 to 20 minute city, which equally applies to smaller places such as West Melton. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the 15 to 20 minute city. Good. I have discussed this particular point with Mr. Ackerman in depth over the last few days, and his assessment shows that from the retirement village nodal point on the eastern boundary of the site, any area on Whedon's Ross Road between State Highway 73 and the northern part of the commercial area can be reached by a pedestrian in 15 minutes using a suitable walking pace for young and older members of society. To reach the southern and northern corners of the site, that would extend that to the 20-minute margin. With regard to access to facilities and public transport, Mr. Thompson in his rebuttal already elaborates on the fact that retirement villages tend to provide their own organised bus service, using smaller vans to enable groups to go to shopping areas and social and recreational events in and around town and to neighbouring cities. A similar service is proposed and could include a connection to the bus stop in the town centre to match up with the bus timetable. A final important aspect identified in assessment matters, and I've raised them earlier, with regard to accessibility specific to a retirement village, is whether the development is located within the walkable distance of a centre zone, community facility, or any arterial or collector road as set out in that particular roading hierarchy. The proposed development meets the criteria. The site is within 15 to 20 minute walking distance to the town centre. Furthermore, it provides its own on-site community facility, is within walkable distance to Iris Taylor Avenue, which is classified a collector road. And that basically sums it up.
Thank you. I'll see if we have any questions arising from either that material or your earlier evidence.
So this morning I received an updated narrative to the ODP, but I haven't received the updated ODP.
All right,
It shows
that you're talking about the graphic part of
Yes,
the ODP.
yes.
Yes, we haven't changed that. It still remains basically the same.
So would the second exit appear on the updated version?
Not at
The west, you're talking about the
Yes.
western, the
Yes.
lower western. Yes, that is on the, that always has been on. The only request there was to make it clearer, graphically clearer, but it has always right from the beginning been on. That's in my rebuttal evidence. So there is no change to the graphics of the ODP.
Okay.
The only changes for the ODP are within the narrative.
Okay, I've got that. Thank you.
Good.
Yes, very interesting. I mean, independent living for elderly is very important and to be provided in such things as we have here. I'm very concerned. We seem to be talking about connectivity, and we're talking about walking and cycling, and 50 to 20 minutes walking, different natures of movement. We're not in a hurry, but as we get older, as I can attest to, we get a little bit more infirm, and walking long distances is not actually top of the priority. And I'm very concerned that yes, we can move people in shuttles, and people can get in their own vehicles, but I don't see a great deal of linkage for the scooter, for the mobility scooter, for the people to be able to get in and out unless they're going through the nebulous pathways of the existing township to get through to what I would expect would be the cafes and the sort of places that people might want to move. Has there been any conversations with Te Waka Kotare as to pathways along the motorway, along the highway? Because I know they are somewhat difficult to deal with when it comes to main highway corridors, because I'm very concerned about this proposal and people be able to move around on their own steam when they might not be as physically able to walk as they possibly can.
Just with regard to motorized, or semi-motorized movement that requires just a level of accessibility in terms of not having to go up curbs and things like that. So making that possible. I have walked through Preston Downs to find all the little shortcuts in the movement through, and I can confirm that it is actually there's a high amenity for walking through. There are stormwater areas within there with very well formed pathways, and the transition from a pathway crossing the road and back up is all works well for access with even wheelchairs, if that was the case. So in the same sense, there is a pedestrian and cycling shortcut between Iris Taylor, which runs north-south and links onto the state highway. Just north of Elizabeth Allen, there is a shortcut through which is used by children to go to the school, and it terminates in a cul-de-sac and then links very safely onto Whedon's Road with a very well maintained and formed pedestrian priority crossing. So when it comes to safely manoeuvring through, I would have no concerns in that case. That would always be the most desirable route from the site to that commercial centre. When it comes to getting to for example, the Domain or the new community centre, which are actually on the opposite side of State Highway 73, that is where the connectivity is at the moment, currently, I would say, for everyone, no matter whether you're retired or not, tricky. It's not an easy one, but I do expect there to be quite significant changes with the intersection layout. And I do also expect that the state highway will, over time, I can't put a time frame on it, obviously, but in discussion with Waka Kotahi and council and participants around the road, that will gradually move eastwards and westwards to actually improve and change that state highway from a purely highway oriented traffic mode to one where it's more like a town centre main street, and expect over time there also to be reduction in speed and crossing points to come through. The new community centre is a destination, so for everyone, not just the retirement village. So the movement along State Highway 73 on the northern edge of it, between the retirement village and the city centre and connections to the community centre, I expect that to change. The question here is when and how. So what the proposal does is it future-proofs by providing very strong connections toward that southeast corner. And I am aware, in discussions with Mr. Ackerman, that the Waka Kotahi has the possibility to widen the area of State Highway 73, so that although there's a covenant, and I probably would have to discuss or ask other people with that exact expertise, but there are opportunities for Waka Kotahi to actually gain more land to provide a proper pedestrian cycling connection. If that was not the case, and putting in a pedestrian connection right now with the state highway as is, that would require metal barriers to separate them safely, and probably even if it was provided, would not be a pathway of choice because of the high speeds on State Highway 73.
I'm very aware of the difficulty in getting the roadworks accepted that's happening right at the moment at the intersection.
So does that answer your question?
Thank you.
And no further questions from me. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can move to the final witness. So you're all familiar with, so Mr. Thompson. And you're going to address them on the amendments to the LDP narrative, which you should have that document on your screens, and the red highlights of the changes that are made.
Yes, thank you, and good call, everybody. So I think there are three things I will cover off, which hopefully will help the panel. I don't have any additional material to circulate apart from the amended outline development plan narrative, which I'll take you through. I'll briefly touch on the joint witness statement between myself and Mr. Friedman. I'll do that very carefully because it is a signed agreement, and I certainly won't embellish there or anything like that. I'll just point to the areas of agreement which are as written, and the areas of where we haven't necessarily agreed, just to help clarify the outstanding issues. And then thirdly, I'll obviously move to questions around my evidence and the rebuttal. So in terms of the ODP, the outline, the new amendments are in red, and the ones submitted previously are there in the black, bold, underlined. So I'll ignore there's consequential amendments like the first one, where it crossed out all medium density housing, because that's no longer considered to be on the table as far as the submitter is concerned. So we get into land use and density. So it is to be developed for retirement purpose. It just makes it clear that that is the primary purpose of this plan, of this submission. Then the next paragraph, the key part there is about the village hub, which Ms. Lonstein mentioned, and so it's just to read it out. It's intended to accommodate recreation and other community programs with ancillary administrative offices, and will include facilities such as the CAF, small gymnasium, and exercise rooms. That building will not include any residential development, hospital, or dementia care units, and will be limited to a height of 9.5 metres to accommodate. Sorry, it's a two-storey building, not TO, and ensure that the building scale and outcomes reflect the context of the wider built environment, both internally and externally. So the key point there, sir, is a 9.5 height limit. Now, the normal height limit for retirement village, it's the default position is 8 metres, but you can go to 11.5 metres subject to not exceeding a site cover, a building coverage. I think it's 15%. So we've proposed 9.5 because we want to make sure it's contained to 2 stories and has the appropriate scale within the overall context of the site. So that type of facility, I think, like Commissioner Lyle, I'm probably in that demographic too, where I'm indirectly kind of in contact with quite a few retirement villages. I have to say indirectly, but these are quite common. So, and of course, you'd be familiar as well, of course, having heard those other proposals around the country. So that is a very typical sort of facility, and the importance of it is it kind of retains a community focus on site. So it comes back to, I think, Councillor Lyle's point before about the walking distances. Most facility or needs should be met on site within that community facility. Obviously, for food and other things, that there will need to be other services provided, but there are a lot of options for those in retirement villages. Either independently sought by people's own driving or community van or electric bike, or or friends or relatives, of course, can come and take people down to a supermarket or further afield if they need to. So but that community facility is, you know, quite an important part of the overall infrastructure. Now, the next point is the last one, and this is the key, and I think it resolves what has been a fairly laborious and contentious matter about what happens, and it was raised in Mr. Friedel's report quite rightly. But what happens if, you know, the land gets flogged off and some other developer grabs it for general residential? And we spent quite a little bit of time, both myself and more latterly with Mr. Friedel, trying to come up with a sort of a rules package in the plan to deal with that. And it got quite, we came up with medium density development, but then it got quite technical. So I thought that, well, the best way to do this, and if you, is a covenant or a consent notice or some other legal instrument on the title, which I think is a legitimate instrument under the Act. And if you do a Section 32 analysis, you meant to look at other methods other than regulation. In fact, that was probably the point of the Act in the first place, was to try and remove regulation. So this is an instrument which makes, but really avoids playing around with the plan, and simplifies the process. And it is, I believe, quite secure. And I mean, there are obviously, I'm not a lawyer, of course, but I understand that these things are quite common. And in fact, in the joint agreement with Mr. Friedel, he acknowledges that. So that's the first part. The next part of where it's got sustainability, that hasn't changed. That it does highlight that this development, like a growing number of others, will have sustainable transport choices. So, and I think that's the key thing, coming back to Commissioner Lyle's point again, is that, sure, I mean, as we get older, we can't walk as far. So you need other forms of transport. And I think the key thing in the emerging policy that's coming out of central government, in fact, even the recent draft, well, general policy statement on transport, is really about sustainable transport choices. Whether it's walking, whether it's e-scooters, whether it's mobility scooters, whether it's e-bikes, and there are a lot of there's a growing number of micro transport options going on here. So this facility will provide those choices, not just walking. So that will be, so electric, you know, shuttles, that kind of thing. Then we come, there's just a heading there. What I tried to do, Sir, after I was here on Friday, and you mentioned the desirability of keeping the headings and the format consistent with what's in the plan already. So I've just gone through and changed some of the headings. So north-south, what we've got here, and this is probably still to be resolved, I think, amongst the experts around this vesting. It seems to be the issue which is probably still not quite resolved. So what that says, though, even though that currently the proposal is not to vest the roads with the council, it is to design them in such a way that in the future, if they are vested, that they'll be up to a standard. So that part of that future proofing again. Further on, there's no other amendments really until towards the vesting of the infrastructure. That's really, in fact, that's about it. I think that's where we, that's already in there. So they're just the proposed change. I'm just happy to take questions on that in the meantime, sir, if you want to do that.
All right, thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight from any of the other evidence you provided?
Not from my other evidence, no.
All right, we'll see if we have questions.
Oh, I was only going to go, that was questions on the ODP. I was going to move briefly on to the joint statement, if you would like me to do that first.
Yeah, why don't you do that, and then
Okay.
that might cover off things we might want to have asked you anyway.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of what we've agreed, and I refer you to the joint statement, which is online, it is, I've got 3 or 4 documents open here, just gotta hit the right one. That one there. So I'll use the wording here, so to make sure that, you know, that there's no question about interpretation, but it's we agreed that there are that the economic and social benefits arriving from the development. So there are these benefits, and so that to me goes to the heart of Section 5 of the Act. So you know that's in the Act is to enable the community to meet its social economic needs. So that you'll see that in the, I haven't highlighted the paragraph, Sydney, but you'll see that in the agreement. The second thing is that it satisfies the gateway test in terms of the NPS. Now that the gateway test to me is about policy 8, policy 1, and policy 6, and that's about being responsive, and I think it also would cover the well-functioning urban environment requirement, or contributing to a well-functioning urban environment. The third thing I think I consider we agreed on was the statutory framework recognises changes to amenity. So there will be changes to amenity, and that is something which came up in Mr. Nicol in the joint statement on urban design. But to my mind, amenity is something which the NPS puts a lower weight on. It acknowledges that amenity will change, but you know, changes in amenity have different benefits to different groups. And amenity is a Section 7 matter in the Act. It's just something to have particularly regard to. Certainly not a national importance or anything like that. So have particular regard to that. Of course, the proposal has had particular regard to it through the treatment of the edge and the ODP and creating a proper buffer between the proposed retirement village and the existing residents. The economic experts agree that clause 3.1 of the National Policy Statement of Urban Development, sorry, 6.1 can be satisfied. So that's to do with the discussion before around the economic benefit, that the benefits outweighing the costs. So there was joint, my understanding that both Mr. Floyd and Mr. Colgrave agreed that that particular matter can be satisfied. The areas of disagreement, the ODP does not sufficiently address the impact of on the character of the area or support accessibility. And these are things which have already come up in the evidence in the statement of Ms. Lowenstein. The vesting of the north-south road still has to be resolved. And then, yeah, the kind of the public access, getting public access into the or to and along or within the retirement village. So to me, the areas of disagreement aren't strategic, as far as I have interpreted our JWS. And I don't think, listening to the evidence today, I don't think that the issues are to do with the plan. They're to do with more around implementation of the outline development plan. For example, do the public have access? Should the roads be vested? And are there guarantees that this will stay as a retirement village rather than default to some other general zone? I think that last one I think has been resolved. The other two about vesting, I think, are matters of implementation. And also I think Mr. Da Costa is able to, he's prepared to actually talk to the council further on that. You may want to invite him to speak on that if need be. But they, to me, are the outstanding issues. So I'm just happy to take questions now on the remainder of evidence and rebuttal. Oh, that's on, yeah, okay, sorry, it's online.
I can't find them online and I haven't got the joint
Oh,
witness
okay.
statements. I've just received a traffic
Oh,
one.
it may not be online.
But I couldn't find it online.
No, it
either,
may not
but,
be.
There
No.
was an email from the administrator, I thought, on Friday that circulated, or Thursday last week.
Just check with the other panel. Do the other panel members have the joint witness statements? Ms. Thompson, know the joint witness statements, planning, economics, traffic and urban design.
Sorry, the one I'm reading is actually not online. I'm taking it from.
And I just want to check what's we're
Yeah.
supposed to have. So there's
Yeah.
four.
Four.
So I've only got the traffic one. Do other commissioners have the JWS? Yeah, Andrew? No, none of us have the joint witness statements, Justine, so they haven't been sent to us.
I'll have to look into that, so.
So that's not your fault. That's the council's fault. But what we'll do is, I didn't want to interrupt your flow. And on the earlier witnesses, I thought I'm just stupid and I filed them somewhere and I can't find them. That's why I opened up the JWSs from another submitter. So we will have to read those JWSs once we receive them. And what we'll do, if we have any questions arising, we'll come back in writing with those. So Mr. Cleary, apologise for that.
Yes.
There's a lot of documentation.
Yeah, but we should have been sent them. All right, Mr. Thompson, I'll see if we have questions for you based on the material that we have received.
For supplying the mana whenua statement. Thank you.
Yes.
No, you've walked me through it well, Ivan. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like, I've got a couple of questions at the end of your rebuttal evidence. And I appreciate that I've also been sent an amended Appendix 38 narrative. So I think what I'll do first is I'll just ask the question in relation to your rebuttal evidence. And I'm just interested in Appendix 2, right at the end of your rebuttal evidence. You're seeking to amend the height limit. So that's on.
Yes.
Yes. So I haven't seen a lot of documentation across the various pieces of evidence submitted as to, is that still being sought and why is that change being sought? Can you
No,
clarify
that hasn't been changed. That's still, that's the 7 metre along the eastern boundary.
So the LWM north zone?
Yes, yes, sorry. So the proposal is there, and that was that's been offered up to soften the interface between the existing residential area and the built environment, I guess. So you've also got this, no doubt, it's in the evidence of Ms. Lawrence Stone as well, that that was a concern of the local residents from the initial plan change that was lodged. So we've got the landscaping buffer, that's 20 metre setback, and instead of an 8 metre height, it's 7 metres.
Sure. So, okay, right.
Yeah.
So it's still being sought and that's for that reason. Okay.
It's still in there.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And then my next questions relate to the amended ODP. So we'll use the version that's come from the joint witness statement. I guess I'm interested in just trying to look at how I can describe this. It's on page 2, and it's the additions that you have added around shared walking and cycling paths will comply with the required standards. However, cycleways leading through development will remain for residents only until developments to the north or west requires more public permeability of the site. Have you found that statement?
Yeah, that's, well, would have helped to have page numbers on the.
Yes, I can't see a page number.
So it's
on page 2, I think.
So north south, it's that one.
And also the area in red.
Oh, it's the existing one, all shared. Yes, sorry.
Yes, that's underlined in black bolded, and then you've also got a red statement, a red bolded underlined, which talks similarly about they'll be developed to a standard to provide through traffic if needed to integrate with future urban zoning. So I guess I'm just interested in how is that enforceable? How does that triggered that those change that they then need to become available for through traffic or available for non-residents? How does that work?
So what it's saying, let's read it out. All shared cycle paths will comply with required standards. However, cycleways leading through the development will remain for residents only until development to the north or west requires more public permeability permeability of the site. So that's the same with the road. So what it's saying there is, and it comes back to this public access issue, and they are used for the benefit of the residents, but they're designed, if it's such a time, then you get a wider cycle network that links into any surrounding future area, then they'll be designed in such a way. And there are design standards for cycleways, of course, anyway. Should be. I know some councils have them for lighting and for width and that kind of thing. So they'll be designed so that in the future, if they're needed, they can link into a wider cycleway network.
Yeah, I understand that. It makes sense to me. What I'm not clear on is what's the trigger mechanism for that to occur? Is it when the council rings you up and says, "Hey, we think we've reached the point where that should be now public," or is it the internal management decided that's reached that point, and how is it enforceable retrospectively?
The trigger point would need to be a plan change for the land surrounding it. Oh. So at that time, I guess you're looking a fair way down the track. It's a bit hard to imagine how things are going then, but what may well happen, I can envisage, is that the council or the developer of the new urban area will come to the retirement village managers and say, look, how about we cooperate and integrate our developments? And perhaps then through an outline plan at a future plan change, that then becomes an integrated cycleway network through that process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
I know where you're coming, but I can't really see any other trigger for that.
Sure, I understand.
Other than through a legal agreement or some other mechanism that involves the sorry. Well, I don't know whether it needs to be this. I think it's going to happen through a negotiated process in the future or through some future outline development plan. Because what we're saying here, this is all based on future urban development around the site, which may or may not happen.
Sure, but I guess the issue of permeability and accessibility has been highlighted in some of the various reports on this, and
absolutely,
and this is a response to, I guess, to try and achieve that. Should it be required in the future? And I'm just interested in how would that be required when the development's potentially already been done and given effect to, and the plan provisions are not retrospective.
No, but the infrastructure will be partly there already within that site. So it's just a matter of connecting them up.
Yeah, and so, and my final question in relation to the ODP revised narrative was the last two lines. So the section on if residential activity changes from being retirement, then those roads, reserves, and pedestrian facilities will be vested in the councils. That's been struck through.
Yes,
and that's presumably because of the additions further up around legal instruments and the fact that the pedestrian ways and roads will be designed so that they could be public in the future.
Oh yes, that's no longer, it's a redundant clause now.
So is it redundant? I mean,
well,
what's the harm in keeping that though?
Well, it's unlikely to happen. Well, you know, looking over the 10-year plan period, I would imagine if someone's spending a lot of money on a retirement village, it's going to last more than 10 years or whatever. So that instrument and the proposal is to have that legal instrument reviewed after 10, at least 10 years. So I'm ambivalent as to whether it stays or not.
Sure. I just said that's what I'm querying. Is it, for all intents and purposes, if it's a retirement village, then it's redundant. It certainly is. But if it's not, what's the harm in keeping it?
Oh, well, you can look. That's fine. I don't think there's any issue with that. Keeping that there, if that's going to help. Yeah,
that's why I think there's just questions around this again, just permeability to the site. That's all.
Okay. I mean, I'm happy. Well, I don't know. I don't have an issue from a planning perspective.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. No further questions from me either. Mr. Cleary, the submitter had a number of other submissions on the proposed district plan, different concepts and wider areas. Have they all been abandoned now? Is this the sole proposal that you're asking us to make a decision on? Okay. All right, I think that brings us to the end of our questions. Is there anything you'd like to say by way of closing?
No. I just again, I mean, if we're not able to hear from Mr. Friedel now or Mr. Nicholson, I'm just wondering, as I signaled at the outset, you know, sort of we're willing to continue that dialogue between the planners in a sort of in a conferencing sense. And I think Mr. Friedel is keen to have that as well. And maybe I can just say about the issue about vesting, as did I say it in the submissions, but those are the sort of matters of detail that are invariably resolved at the time of subdivision consent. And I think it's somewhat unusual for them to be raised in the context of a rezoning, because they are implementation decisions, as Mr. Thompson has said. And but the key point from our perspective is that you know, if at some stage in the future vesting is required, then the various linkages, the roads and pathways will be constructed to appropriate council standards. That's essentially it.
All right, thank you. And what we do now is, because we don't, with the earlier hearings last year and started this year for the other chapters of the plan, we would get a reply report from the officers that would be submitted to us several weeks after the hearing closed, or longer in some cases. That's not happening for the rezoning hearings during the time and resourcing pressures on the council. So we now ask the reporting officers if there's anything they wish to add at this stage, and also this is their opportunity to ask questions of the reporting officer. So Mr. Friedel, is there anything that you'd wish to advise us of that's arisen during the hearing that's led you to change any of your recommendations to us?
No, there hasn't been. I guess I need to frame that around the amount of extra evidence that has been tabled in the last few hours, to try and for all the experts to wrap their heads around, including the reporting officers. So that does, you know, I just frame that comment in that context.
And I'll see if the panel has any questions for you or for Mr. Nicholson, who's, I think, been watching. Raymond, any questions, Mr. Andrew? No, and I have no further questions either for you or Mr. Nicholson. As you see, there's a lot of documentation for us to read and some for us yet to read because we haven't received it yet, which is a tad annoying. All right, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of today's hearing. And we next reconvene in quite some time. Let me just check. So we next convene on Monday, the 13th of March, where we hear about commercial and industrial rezoning submissions. Thank you.